Now I'm going to present my final project, which I called Restaurant Finder. My domain is lifestyle, and specifically I'm focusing on restaurants, and the service which I will provide will be sentiment analysis based on restaurant reviews. As you know, sentiment analysis can be used for social media monitoring and customers review analysis and doing market research. This could be very useful for people who like to go to restaurants and also restaurant owners, because it can be very useful for them to know how a majority of people treat particular restaurant in a positive or in a negative way. Uh, this project is aimed to help users to answer to the question which restaurant in particular city provide best quality service and food, or vice versa, which restaurants are not recommended to go based on reviews extracted from review aggregator websites. Um, so main motivation is allowing to gain overview of the wider public opinion behind a particular topic, and in this case it's restaurants in a particular city. So problem is most people are interested in the bigger picture rather than just knowing case by case, and also it's very hard for users to analyze large amount of reviews in very short time, because there are many resources where we can get this type of information, but it is very good to have all this information aggregated and presented in a very nice way. This is my project concept, where I have built a web application which has web scraping spider and also uses sentiment analysis, and after performing sentiment analysis, it visualizes all the analyzed data. The main users of my service could be people who like to go to restaurant to get information about best restaurants in the city, or vice versa, worst restaurants in the city, or restaurant owners as well can use this service as a feedback. So there are three main outcomes of this project. First one is building a web crawler which will collect data for further analysis. Second one was performing sentiment analysis, and third one was representing visually all the analyzed data, in a nice way, so that users find it useful. For prototyping, I have used for backend Flask and Python, for frontend HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And also I used NLP packages such as MLXtend and NLTK for performing sentiment analysis, and also for performing web scraping I used a tool called Scrapy. And initially I was experimenting with Twitter API to extract data from Twitter, but in my project the data extracted from Twitter was of very little use. So since I couldn't use that data, I moved to scraping scraping restaurant data, specifically from TripAdvisor. For prototyping with hardware, I used my own computer. One simple scenario could be when user enters city name, for example, Busan, Seoul, or London, and then web application will scrape all restaurant information in that particular city from platforms like TripAdvisor, and after we extract all the data, we perform sentiment analysis, and then users will be presented with best top 10 and worst top 10 restaurants in the city based on positive and negative reviews. For training model, I used Yelp review dataset, which is a very large dataset, and for web application, I have, as I mentioned, web scraper, which scrapes necessary data from TripAdvisor, and all this data is stored in a CSV file format. For sentiment analysis, I'm using NLTK, Sentiment Intensity Analyzer, and for networking, I'm just extracting raw data and sending this raw data to sentiment analysis, which is which all these parts of code inside one big Flask application. I have divided my project schedule to 6 subparts. Yeah, in the first 2 weeks, I spent for planning and doing my research on which research project should I choose for this course. And then I spent some time to create my own web spider, which crawls restaurant-related data. And then I tried to interconnect data extraction part with sentiment analysis. And after that, I moved on to coding front end and back end of my web application and interconnecting all the small parts of the web application. For my first outcome, I built a web crawler using Scrapy, which collects restaurant information and reviews from TripAdvisor. For implementation, I used Python and its library called Scrapy. For my second outcome, which was sentiment analysis of crawl data, I used NLTK sentiment intensity analyzer, and at the end I received output -1 for negative reviews and 1 for positive reviews. For my third outcome, I coded front and back end of my web application. For visualizing analyzed data, I used Python Flask backend framework, and tried to visualize output of sentiment analysis, which was in CSV file format. Here you can see the demonstration of the first outcome. Here you can see my web application, running web application, where you can enter city name, and on the right side you can see the example of datasets which will be extracted after you enter your desired city. Here I extract all the reviews on the website. First I make list of all the restaurants in that city, and my code scrolls to each website and gets reviews and relevant restaurant data and stores it in a CSV file format. After I get all the reviews, I perform a sentiment analysis on crawl data. Here you can see the output of sentiment analysis. Here you can see the outcome, sort outcome, which was visualizing analyzed data. On the right side, you can see my web application where you can see graphs where best restaurants and worst restaurants based on positive and negative reviews are shown to users. This was my original Planet project overview. For actual project implementation, I had a little bit hard time for scraping data from more than one resource, so I just focused on scraping web data from TripAdvisor, and then I stored it in the CSV files. For my project outcome, my domain is lifestyle, specifically restaurants, where users can find about best restaurants and worst restaurants in the city. For my AI service is performing sentiment analysis, so that users don't need to go to different websites to check to which restaurant to go or not to go. This is my software architecture, where I have a web application built in a Flask and have mini applications such as Web Spider, which scrolls data, and also I have an LTK sentiment analyzer. So as I mentioned, I have three outcomes. First one is a web crawler, which collects data and stores in a CSV file format that you can see on the right side. And I have a sentiment analysis part. And finally, I have a visual representation of the analyzed data. Yeah, here you can see three outcomes and planned achievement and planned target level. So I can mention that minimum task for me for web crawler was to scrape data at least from one website, big website called TripAdvisor, but in the future I will try to increase number of resources from where I can extract data. Yes, here we can see the changed items. So it was too difficult for me to code web scraper for multiple resources, so only TripAdvisor scraping was achieved, and also all data is stored in CSV files. And Web Spider scrapes all restaurant reviews, and it was difficult to implement scraping reviews written for in a specific time period, for example in the last month. For future plan, I would like to increase number of web scraping resources, and I'd like to implement a review filtering feature based on date of review. Here you can see the software snapshot, where I have one big Flask application which uses other mini applications for web scraping and performing sentiment analysis. Here you can see the dataset after performing sentiment analysis, and also the example of a scraped dataset, which scrapes reviews of restaurants in a specific city based on user input. Here you can see my demo video. Thank you for your attention very much.